Fate Zero. Now, if you've been paying attention to the channel for a while, you know that I went on a pretty long journey these last couple weeks, reacting and revisiting what I've been saying is one of my favorite anime of all time, at the very least, is number 2. And while this recent reaction series was just for me to sort of revisit the series, just because it's been a pretty long time since I visited it, there was also another part of it that was helping me kind of see, is this actually still one of my favorites of all time? And well, before I get into all that, I will say, I know I don't normally do like reviews of stuff like after the reaction series, because my thing is always just like, I talked enough about it during the series, but I wanted to tack this on at the end, because even though I spent the better part of about 15 videos discussing Fate Zero, I want to do one last just overlook of it all. Because honestly, I still feel like there's some stuff that I forgot to touch on. And plus, you know, I'm still on that Fate Zero high, and I just want to keep talking about it, because this is a series that I feel like I can endlessly talk about. But just in case you're watching this video without having watched my whole reaction series, and hopefully you are at least familiar with Fate Zero. Oh yeah, and again, I should specify this. I'm gonna try to keep this review solely on Fate Zero. I'm trying not to talk about everything else Fate, just so that we can have a concrete thing that we're looking at. But all that aside, what is Fate Zero? I guess for those who are watching without knowing. Fate Zero, it's the prequel series to the cult classic and mid to late 2000s anime series Fate Stay Night, that was created after the fact to fill in the gaps and sort of talk about certain events that were mentioned in Fate Stay Night and everything that took place with certain characters before that event, as it follows the events of the Fourth Holy Grail War, which the Holy Grail War is a war that takes place between different mages in this world, because every 60 years, the Holy Grail in the Fate world is the Holy Grail, not like the one that Jesus drank from and all that, not like Last Crusade Holy Grail. It's a reward for the master who prevails in this war by defeating the other 6 masters and their 6 servants, and then when they get the Holy Grail, they can make any wish that their heart desires. And where Fate Zero picks up is the 4th war. And one of the biggest praises I have for this show is that, at the very least early on, it's not so much a show in which there's like a concrete main character, it's more an ensemble show. You spend ample amount of time with pretty much every master and servant, which again is one of the biggest praises I have for it, because when it gets to the point where some of these masters and servants start dying, you feel it, because you spend so much time learning these masters' motivations, why they're in the war, the servants and their backstories and everything. But the intricacies of how the war works is that the Holy Grail will pick 7 masters. At the very least, 3 of the masters that are always guaranteed to be in the war are those of the house Ainsburn, Tosaka, and Mato. I mean, I'm not going to delve too much into early Fate lore, but pretty much they were the ones that sort of helped start the whole Holy Grail War thing, which originally it was meant to be like a unifying thing between the houses, but then it turned into war and bloodshed and they started fighting each other. But that's the past. We're in this. Normally, you would think like, oh, it's a war, so they fight each other, but no. How the fighting works is that they then have to summon a heroic spirit, a servant, using either a relic as a catalyst, or if they don't have a relic, the Grail will pick for you, in which a heroic spirit pretty much is someone in history. Case in point, the most iconic Fate servant being Arthur Pendragon, or Artoria Pendragon, Saber, and those heroic spirits are summoned into specific classes, being they the classes of either Saber, Archer, Lancer, Rider, Caster, Assassin, or Berserker. And honestly, therein lies why I love just the concept of Fate so much, and like this Holy Grail thing, is the servants themselves and just like what classes they get into and like how that affects how their powers work. It's all like a power game in this kind of thing. You may get a really powerful servant, at least in terms of their history and their different powers and whatnot, but they could be put into a class that sort of nerfs some of their stuff. I think a good example is Rider, Iskandar. I mean, he was definitely in the top 3 of most powerful servants in the 4th Holy Grail War. I would say only 3rd, obviously, to like Gilgamesh and Saber. If he maybe was summoned into a class other than Rider, like maybe if Iskandar was summoned as maybe a Saber, or maybe even like a Berserker, it's possible he may have been even more powerful than what we saw. Either way, in terms of our cast for this whole thing, I mean, it's a large cast, and again, biggest praise is that I feel like, obviously not every single character, but pretty much you get the gist with like all these characters enough for you to enjoy watching them, even the dick characters. So of course we have Team Saber, which is run by the master of Saber, being Kiritsugu Emiya, which if you've been around for a while, he's one of my favorite anime characters of all time because of this show. He's in the service of the Ainsburns, and he is helped by his assassin assistant Maya, as well as his wife, Iris Vale, and pretty much throughout the bulk of Fate Zero, at least till the very end, they're the strongest team. But then of course there's Team Archer, in which the servant is Gilgamesh, and the team is fronted by Tokiyomi Tosaka. And of course helping him is the head of the church, Risei Kotomine. Even though the church is supposed to be a neutral party in the war, you know, he has his alliances. And of course also on their team is Risei's son, Kirei Kotomine, who is actually a master in the war. He's actually the master of the servant assassin. But going into the war, before the war officially starts, Tokiyomi and Kirei and Risei decide that, oh, we're all gonna work together. Kirei, you're pretty much in the service of Tokiyomi. He's more helping Tokiyomi succeed rather than, you know, win on his own. And then of course there's Team Lancer, which is fronted by the head of the Archibald house, Kenneth Elmalloy Archibald, as well as his fiancée Slow, and Lancer of course being the heroic knight, first of the Knights of Fianna, Diarmuid Odine, the face of my channel for the longest time, and honestly the reason why I am Lancer. I mean, amongst just the Lancer class honestly being my favorite class. Again, even though the Lancers are sort of the Vegetas of Fate, they may have the best fights and the coolest powers, they will always be second to Kakarot, aka Saber. And then of course there's Team Rider, who is of course a Skandar, fronted by his master Waver. And then there's Team Berserker, which is fronted by Karyamato, but, you know, sort of Zoken as well, you know, because he wants to win the Grail. And of course the biggest thing, Karya sort of has the most pure motivation when it comes to being in the Grail War, just because Karya wants to save Sakura, who is the daughter of Tokiyomi, but he gave her up to the Matos because of bunch of fucked up shit. And then of course there's Team Caster, which is fronted by Ryunosuke Uryu, who is someone who doesn't understand anything or know what's happening with this Grail War, but he just sees this as a chance to continue his killing as he unintentionally summons the servant Caster, aka Gilles de Rais. I don't know if I want to delve into spoilers for this, really, even though again this is sort of just an extension, like a bookend to my reaction series. I don't know, my reviews have always sort of been spoiler free, but the main reason why I'm doing this is just to give some last like final praises that I sort of forgot to do at the end of the reactions, which is, you know, someone could see a show like Fate Zero, which again is animated and done amazingly by Studio Ufotable, which of course is famous for doing stuff like Demon Slayer and of course other Fate stuff. So of course like the biggest thing is like, oh, the art, the animation and everything, which of course is absolutely stunning. Obviously one of the biggest things I do have to point out is just like, this is definitely Ufotable still when they're in their early days, because again, this show originally aired in 2011, so this show is coming up on 13 years old now. So when you watch it, you know, you sort of have this back of your mind expectation when it comes to Ufotable. Not me though, because again, I watched Fate Zero before ever watching something like Demon Slayer or anything, so I really had no expectations or anything for Ufotable, outside of one fight that I saw beforehand. But honestly, as fucking astoundingly and ridiculously beautifully animated as stuff like Demon Slayer and even the later Fate Stay Night stuff, there's something about Fate Zero's style in this. Not like everything is like super polished and everything and like 60 FPS action like you see with later stuff, but I say I like that more, just because, I don't know, it allows you to take in what you're looking at and not just have like a slew of explosions and special effects. Again, the art, the animation, everything is amazingly well done. But when I think about Fate Zero, the first thing that comes to mind, it's not the fights, it's not the animation, it's the characters. The characters, the writing, the plot, everyone's motivations, the ideologies. Again, Fate Zero, the clash of ideologies, that's like the next tagline of it, you could say. The fact that this is a story that can't really do its own things, because it sort of has to fit in with the history and certain stuff that will then eventually lead into Fate Stay Night, at least once you get more towards the end. I fully can say, like, you could watch Fate Zero on its own and never watch any of the Fate Stay Night stuff. There will always be kind of like that lingering thing of, if you want to see more, but if you just want like a solid story, just watch Fate Zero. And then if you want to watch more, there's Fate Stay Night, and it's 3 different routes, even though only 2 of them were done by Ufotable, so I really only recommend those 2. And then if you want to be even more insane like I am, there is a plethora of other Fate shows and movies and everything else done over the years that, for me personally, range anywhere from dog shit to, I mean, it's alright. There's only been like a couple other things aside from the Ufotable stuff that has been like, wow, that was pretty good. Either way, I'm trying to stay focused on Fate Zero. But yeah, going back to that, that's one of the biggest praises I have, is that it introduces characters like Karia, Waver, Cainith, Maya, Iris Veil, Tokiomi, like some of these characters that do play somewhat of a part in the events of Fate Stay Night, but for the most part can sort of be seen as almost throwaway characters, even the character of Kiritsugu. Because I know there is the argument that, oh, you should watch Fate Stay Night before you watch Fate Zero, which there's a part of me that does kind of understand that, just because, you know, there's certain stuff that is done in Fate Zero, obviously, that if you're familiar with Fate Stay Night would be like, oh, so that's where that came from. But if you're just watching Fate Zero, you're like, what the fuck is that? But then you go into Fate Stay Night and it's like, oh, I know what that is. That's not much of a surprise to me that that is happening. It's the same thing of, you know, with like the Star Wars prequels and whatnot. I mean, obviously I'll always say it's like, watch the original trilogy before you watch anything else, because of course the biggest twist in that actually feels like a twist. But for this, I will always say, no, watch Fate Zero, just because again, I think it's better. But introducing characters like that are sort of inconsequential to the plot, but they add so much flavor and richness to the world. And there are other characters that they get delved into more in other stuff because of this show. Again, characters like Waver and even Cainith. Again, even the character of Kiritsugu. Because going into like Fate Stay Night and whatnot, it's like, yeah, even though Kiritsugu is a very important character, obviously, to Shiro and what he represents for him, Fate Zero is ultimately Kiritsugu's story. Because like in Fate Stay Night, you get bits and pieces of Kiritsugu's story from other characters and whatnot, and you understand like, oh, yeah, Shiro, your dad had a hell of a life before he adopted you. But like, you never kind of see it. But then, of course, you watch Fate Zero and it's like, holy shit, Kiritsugu, man. He's one of my favorite characters just because he has an ideology that can be seen as fucked up, but you understand it at the same time. He's needs of the many versus needs of the few. But the way he goes about it is insane. This is where I'll just start talking about the ideologies of the characters, which again, it's the biggest part of Fate Zero. I guess I'll start with Kiritsugu, because Kiritsugu's whole wish that he wants to ask the Grail is to remove all conflict and war from the world. But through many events, and then eventually Kiritsugu even coming face to face with the Grail, the deconstruction of his ideology, even over the course of the show up to that point, it's his clashes with Saber, where Kiritsugu, obviously, he's very willing to sacrifice, again, the lives of the few to save the many, whereas Saber, she's not willing to sacrifice anybody, you know, she's very honor-bound, she's chivalrous, whereas Kiritsugu even says to her at one point, glory, honor, there's no place for that on the battlefield. And that's honestly one thing, like, when I was rewatching Fate Zero this time, that I never really noticed too much watching it the first few times, that Kiritsugu was just so indifferent towards Saber. There's only about maybe one or two moments in which Kiritsugu directly acknowledges Saber's existence even. Like, obviously he summons her and he supplies her with mana, but for the most part, Kiritsugu, he just views her as a weapon, and he uses her as such. He doesn't care about forming a relationship with her, not as much as Airi does. And it's just a sad thing by the end of Kiritsugu's story in this, when he's met with that choice and a realization that, oh, to save the world from conflict, you would have to destroy all of humanity. And of course, he wouldn't take that, in which he then just rejects everything that he pretty much has built his whole life around. And he's now no longer needs of the many over needs of the few. He's, I'll save whoever I can. And it's an ideology that eventually bleeds into Shiro. But speaking of clashes and ideologies, Kiritsugu's, I would say rival, but it's more his equal throughout Fate Zero, and that being Kirei Kotomine. God damn, man. Really, Fate Zero is just one really long extended prologue and ultimate backstory of Kiritsugu and Kirei. Because where Kirei starts in this story, he's someone who has, you know, he just lost his wife, and now he's been chosen to be a master in this war, but really he's not gonna be, because he's just gonna be in service to Tokiomi. He's sort of someone who's just going along with it all, you know? He's just like, this is a mission, I'm gonna do what I need to do. But through his conversations, specifically with Gilgamesh, he begins to understand more about himself, and that there is more to life than just death. And again, one of the best things about this show is just where Kiritsugu and Kirei both start to where they end. Again, at the very beginning, like, Kirei has no goal, he has no wish. He's only really interested in Kiritsugu, mainly mainly because they both see each other as similar to them. And of course with Kirei, he has almost a fascination with Kiritsugu, whereas Kiritsugu, honestly, he fears Kirei because he's like him. And when it eventually comes to the point when they are literally face to face fighting each other, even though Kiritsugu wins the fight, it's a shame that they never really got to talk much, because I would have loved to have seen a scene where they both had kind of like a Grail dialogue episode where they talked about certain stuff, even though, again, Kiritsugu, he's not much for talk, he mainly just, you know, he wants to get shit done. But yeah, with Kirei, going up to the very end, you know, he starts out so just null and void and just going along with it, going with the flow, no goal. But again, through talking to Gilgamesh and understanding the joy that could be brought in life, by the very end, he's bright, he's smiling, he has a goal, he sees what he wants. And of course, Kiritsugu at the very beginning, again, he's not like smiling, but like he has a goal, he knows what he wants. Once that goal is met, he realizes what was the point of it all, and then he's just left so dead. Their ideologies is not so much a clash as much as it is a swap, which is something I really love with those two. Now, of course, with each of these characters, they have their own ideologies where, like, Tokiomi, though he could sort of be viewed as a boring character, I mean, even in the show, Gilgamesh talks about just, like, he's so boring and dull. Because all Tokiomi wants is that all these mages want to do. They want to reach the root of magic, which pretty much is just this endless wellspring of, you know, it's infinite power, pretty much. And, of course, Tokiomi being the head of the great Tosaka clan and house, he wants to preserve, you know, the sanctity of it, because he's very much like a just rich, pompous, just like, oh yes, the legacy of my house will live on in my children. You only really see Tokiomi like fight once, and even then it's not really a fight. He does one attack and it's over. But again, he's more just something that leads into Kirei's story, something that Kirei eventually has to accept and then deal with. Then of course there's Waver and Ryder, which at the end of the day, they are the true heart and soul of Fate Zero, and you know, obviously the comedy relief, because in a show like this you definitely need it. And honestly, you know, Iskandar is, for everybody who watches this, is one of the greatest characters, just because, again, comparatively to everyone else in the story who's just like dark, gloomy, emotionless, you know, Iskandar is just so bright, he's smiling, you know, very large-hearted. His contrast with Waver, their whole thing is, you know, the biggest and the smallest. Ultimately, like, this whole war for Waver, you know, by the very end, it was just like the ultimate confidence booster. Because, you know, Waver starts out, it's like, he just wants to be someone who can prove himself in any sort of way, and then by the end, obviously, Iskandar helps him open up and realize that there's more to life than just being a mage, you know? You can go out and see the world. Waver's development as a character is one of my favorites. Like, just his final line to, like, his grandparents, just like, I want to do some traveling. Which, again, eventually leads into the show Elmo Lake Case Files, which is seeing more of Waver in his adulthood, which is, you know, really cool. And, of course, just Iskandar, not even just being, you know, a loud, just funny character, he's also just a pretty deep character as well. I mean, not super deep, but just in the way that he views kingship. He's not just a big, jolly fella, you know? He's someone who views kingship as, yes, you're meant to be tyrannical and whatnot and greedy. Like, especially, you know, one of the best episodes in anything, episode 11, the Grail dialogue. Like, his berating of Saber and how she's chosen to be a king. A king must be greedier than any other, laugh more loudly, rage for much longer, and embody the very extreme of all things good and evil. Like, Iskandar, even though he may look maybe kind of stupid and just like, you know, big brawny muscle for brains, no, he's smart, man. You know, he didn't conquer most of the known world at the time for no reason. And then, of course, probably my second favorite character, I don't know, it's hard to pick. Every character in this show, like, even though Kiritsugu may be my overall just favorite, it's hard to like put like, oh yeah, first, second, third, fourth. It's Kiritsugu and then everyone else, because everyone's just written so well. Like, even the dick characters like Kainith, and even fucked up characters like Ryunosuke and Castor, if they make you feel a certain emotion, it's because they're written to make you feel that emotion. Like with Ryunosuke and Castor, you're meant to feel that feeling of, oh my god, just kill these guys, man. But at the same time, it's like they're kind of comedic in how fucked up they are. And then even with Kainith, who's a character who is very, you know, Draco Malfoy in how he goes about, you're nothing but lowborn scum, and then, you know, eventually leads to his very satisfying demise. Satisfying, but at the same time, it makes you feel pity for him. Kainith absolutely has the largest fall from grace in this whole story. Just because, you know, he starts as just such a highborn, just again, like Draco Malfoy kind of character, where by the end, he loses all his magic, he's like paralyzed paralyzed pretty much, and then he's just gunned down while holding his unconscious wife, and then he's bleeding and begging for mercy, and it's like, how can you not feel bad for the guy even though he was a dick? It's hard to pick who my favorite servant was, but I mean, Gilgamesh, man. It's seeing this version of Gilgamesh and then going into Fate Stay Night, in which it's like, these aren't the same character. They are in name and design, but the Gilgamesh in Fate Stay Night is, I'm gonna be honest, he's boring. Like, you kind of see a little bit of the Zero Gilgamesh in the Unlimited Blade Works route. I don't know, he never gave me that same feeling, just that shrill and mocking and even just overpowered feeling as he did in Zero. That's why I want Ufotable to do a remaster or just a remake of the Fate Stay Night route, because in that version you do see more of kind of the Zero Gilgamesh. But yeah, just Gilgamesh, again, it's how he interacts with every character and like who he gives respect to. By the end, he gave the most respect to Wyvern Rider. That's why I love their final fight so much. It's like, again, Gilgamesh, someone who you see throughout this whole story, he's mocking to everybody he views as lesser, because to them they are lesser, because to him he is God and this whole planet is his garden. But someone like Rider, who he even views as like as an equal, at least in terms of their beliefs and whatnot, he fights Rider and he uses his most powerful weapons, and even though it can be seen as a wash in terms of an easy fight for Gilgamesh, I mean, it wasn't easy in the sense that like he had to use his most powerful weapons to defeat him. And then by the end, he doesn't mock Iskandar. He tells him just like, you can challenge me as many times as you like. This world is my garden. It'll never be boring. King of Conquerors. It's a fight that Iskandar, even just going into it, even with his reality marble, he knew he was gonna lose. Just his last thing with Waver as well, just being like, live Waver, see all this through to the end. Tell everybody about the last charge of Iskandar, you know, you're my retainer. And the fact that Gilgamesh respects it is like, you know, it's one of the biggest things with that. Which is then contrasted with like the next episode where then he's met with Saber and he's just mocking her as well. Like, ah, yes, that's the Gilgamesh we're all familiar with. And then something I just completely just forgot to talk about at the end was Karya. He has the most fucked up story in this whole thing. When you really look at it, he didn't really deserve any of what happened to him. He's fighting in this war to save Sakura, which again, going into this story, not knowing anything about Fate Stay Night, I was hoping he would, not knowing that it was pointless because Fate Stay Night happens. It's just sad because Karya just never gets brought up in anything ever again. It would have been nice if in Heaven's Feel or something, Sakura maybe had a moment where she thought of, there was once someone who tried to save me. I don't necessarily remember his face or his name, but maybe you see just like a silhouette of Karya or something. And Karya literally gave his life trying to save that girl. It's just kind of sad because like you spend a good chunk of the first episode of the show with Karya, and then throughout the rest of the show you don't see too much of him, and honestly it vilifies him for some reason. I mean, obviously just because Berserker is so focused on wanting to destroy Saber, it's just mainly because also Zoken just wanted to watch Karya suffer, because like you see Karya become like a Berserker in his own way. Just, you know, he's so focused on just killing. There's just so much I could talk about with every single character in this story. We're gonna start wrapping things out here. I'm gonna give some last praises. Again, going more towards like, you know, the production side of things. My preferred way of watching Fate Zero, and in all honesty, it's the way you should watch Fate Zero, is in the English dub. While I still think the sub is fine, I think people would remember Fate Zero a lot better and honestly probably take in a lot more, at least obviously when it comes to, you know, English native speakers, just cause holy fuck, like that's what adds to these characters, man, is that the voice actors gave like their 110%. There's not one dub performance in this whole thing in which I was like, no. Every single character, 1,000,000%. Again, it's the show that sparked my love for so many amazing voice actors. Again, Matt Mercer, Crispin Freeman, Kerry Walgren, Jameson Pierce, David Vincent, Lucian Dodge. Oh my god, like the list goes on. It makes me wonder, because when Ufotable took on the project of adapting Fate, of course it makes sense that they would start with Zero, you know, I guess they were just trying to do a chronological thing. Like, where's the alternate reality where they adapted like the Fate Stay Night stuff first? Because then probably that would mean that Fate Zero would look incredible. Like, another big thing I give to it, it feels grounded, you know, as grounded as a fantasy tale with magic and stuff could be. It takes the most realistic route that characters like these would go down with these ideologies and whatnot, and how like by the end a lot of these characters, they either die with their ideology like destroyed or it's like intact and whatnot. That's why honestly out of everybody, Rider probably had the best death. He had an amazing fight, he gave a great speech, his opponent respected him all the way through. He died smiling, and he died with like his pride and everything still intact. Whereas, you know, characters like Kainith or Tokiomi or even assassin or lancer. It's like they had their pride and whatnot, just everything just fucking eviscerated. Like, not only did they die physically, they were destroyed just spiritually as well. And then one last thing I'll praise, it's something I'll always praise. Yuki Kaijira, the composer of Fate, but also composes Demon Slayer, does SAO as well. It's this show as well that has cemented her in my mind as, at the very least, favorite anime composer. And just her music for Fate Zero, like I've said, it is the best anime soundtrack, bar none. Even though I may take gaps in watching the show like for years and whatnot, the soundtrack I will listen to religiously for the rest of my life. Though again, like her music for Demon Slayer and like Heaven's Feel and all that stuff is phenomenal. I don't know, I like these soundtracks more. I've given praise to like in different music reactions I've done and whatnot. It's fucking beautiful. This is an anime review, so I normally of course end it with what my score is. And well, yeah, listen, I don't think there's a scale on this earth that can measure just how much I loved this show and love this show, have for many years now. I mean, there is one thing I can say though, now for absolute certainty. For the longest time, at least ever since I watched Fate Zero for the first time, I have grappled with myself on, is it my favorite? Does it rival Dragon Ball Z? And for a while, I have said that, you know, they were neck and neck, and then in recent times, I've more said, it's like, yeah, no, Dragon Ball Z is still number one, but this is like a hard number two. Really, it all comes down to obviously what I'm consuming at the time, because back when I first watched Fate Zero and then was going through a bunch of Fate shit at the time, obviously that was my number one, because I was really focused on it. And then of course I bounced back watching more Dragon Ball stuff, because obviously like superheroes coming out, so I was going through a big thing with that, and of course I do Dragon Ball stuff on the channel. So yeah, it could be argued that right now, since I'm really heavy on Fate Zero right now, it may be. That's why I'm gonna be taking a break before really going into more Fate stuff. I think now I can definitely say with certainty, when it comes to the absolute complete package of Fate Zero, in terms of music, voice acting, characters, art, animation, story, like I said, it's perfect. Again, I'm sure it's not, but it's one of those things that I can watch it and I don't care. I see no flaws. It's one of those things where every episode is oops, all bangers. And though I may have an infinite storehouse of nostalgia and love for Dragon Ball, that series is not perfect. Like, especially even Dragon Ball Z, it's not perfect. So yeah, I'm gonna say it for absolute certainty. For me, Fate Zero is the best anime I have ever seen. It is number one. So yeah, that's my score. Or I guess a more accurate number would be 0. This is a show, just Fate Zero on its own. It's something I can talk about forever. One of these days, maybe I'll sit down with some friends and whatnot, and we can do a whole podcast, honestly, just talking about Fate, because I would love that. And it's a show as well that I may not be able to watch like infinitely back to back, but kind of like Lord of the Rings, it's one of those things that you should experience it at least once a year, or at the very least, maybe every other year. That's why I got like one of my good friends into Fate, just because it's like, bro, I need to talk to somebody about this. Watch this now. I would love to sit down with just anybody, man, just be like, yo, let me hang out. Let's have the best 8 hours, because Fate Zero is just perfection. But either way, I think it's time I finally put a cap on Fate Zero, because yeah, for pretty much like nearly the past month now, it's just been Fate Zero stuff. So I'm sure you're sick of seeing that in the feed, but I promise this is the last video, at least for a while, because like I put at the end of the reaction series, I will be doing reactions to Fate Stay Night. You know, I'll do Unlimited Blade Works and Heaven's Feel at some point in 2024. For now, I'm gonna take a break from the Fate stuff and focus just on these last couple of videos that'll be coming out for 2023, as well as other stuff, because trust me, when it comes to 2024, there will be some big stuff. But this was my final review of Fate Zero. Join me for many other videos of the sort, be they future anime reviews, reactions, gameplay, and everything else that'll be coming out soon. So until next time, I'm Lancer. Thanks for watching.